Welcome to the Wolf and Bull podcast. I am one of your hosts, the Wolf.
And I am the other one. Oh, no, I got to start that damn thing over. We got to start over. You got to start all over again.
He's the bull. And I am Beowulf.
You know, normally I'd want to cut it out, but that was actually hilarious, and I'm thinking of keeping it in because that's quite funny.
Yeah.
Well, if you don't,
because
then
of
I am the bull.
There we go. You
got it.
Welcome. And it is, surprise, surprise, the 75th episode of the Wolf and Bull podcast. We have been going almost as long as our dear POTUS, hopefully much longer. And with that being said, if you want to become the part that we all appreciate and love, the family of the Wolf and Bull, you can by finding us on Instagram. You can also find us on YouTube. Our episodes come on every Thursday on audio platforms across the world, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and additionally, we are also releasing videos on Fridays on YouTube and Rumble. Subscription would be greatly appreciated. I'll name my firstborn child after your username.
That is not in the contract, but
Big Wiener Johnson Force 20. That is the name. that's the name of the child. How is everybody doing? Rusty intro per usual.
I'm doing great. I'm feeling
very rusty, actually.
Rejuvenated, refreshed.
And why would that be, Bale?
I think that's because we just came off of a beautiful vacation away from home.
We were away?
Away. There was still an episode last week, but
how did that happen?
Magic.
It is. It's magic. Magic. And I think the last episode was about extending one's life.
It was, yeah.
Right. And I think the best medicine, you should go back and listen to that if you haven't already. See it, listen to it. It's on right now. It's getting, I'm sure it will get lots of comments. It certainly should. It was a very exciting, fun thing to talk about. But I think the best thing to increase your longevity in this world is a few days relaxing on a beach.
I say once a month.
The best medicine.
Yeah.
Once a month. Holy crap.
No.
Not everyone can be as an exciting person as you. I can't do that.
Unless your mantra is life's a beach, and then you're there all the time.
True. I used to be, but then I moved to the desert.
And if your mantra's life's
very sandy, it's very similar.
If your mantra's life's a beach, you're likely an alcoholic. So we're gonna go ahead and leave that statement.
Well, said that as
we all drink alcohol.
Cheers.
Yeah,
it's 5
cheers.
o'clock somewhere.
It is 5 o'clock here.
So
it is somewhere.
Yeah. Wow.
It is actually 5 o'clock.
Exactly.
Because I'm a magician. I am a magician. Thank you. I'm here all week, all day.
Wolf usually doesn't be able to read time until the moon is up.
That is true.
Yeah.
I'm a werewolf. Yeah. Well, everyone's week's going great. I don't know if there's anything we should say outside of that. We could segue right into the monologue.
Happy early Thanksgiving.
I think.
Yeah.
Or I guess Thanksgiving, because this will be out
on Thanksgiving.
Or on Thanksgiving.
We should say that these are opinions that we have today, because if they were actually facts and statements and not just opinions that we have about certain things,
then we could
be scored down.
We'd be CNN.
We don't want to be scored other than top tier, top priority. We want to set the standard for all others on ethical and moral standards.
We should have recorded on vacation. I feel so rusty. Clearly, we're slothing. We're going through this.
We're slothing.
We're slothing through this.
The sloth is not here today.
Well, not today.
I know my intro was kind of slothian.
I really thought you broke there for a second.
Well, I did, but I also thought you were going to cut and start over, so I didn't think it was a big deal. Instead, you just rode with it because you like to put up these little memes of the bull.
I'll put a little processing,
wandering aimlessly in the field.
Of a little bull walking across the field, like the screen. It's gonna be great.
I think this topic today is going to be a good segue into Thanksgiving dinner.
Yeah.
So if you're someone who really has a strong opinion on this one way or another, it's a really good idea to bring this up at the topic tonight at the table tonight. Really get the blood boiling at the table. Some fights over the mashed potatoes.
Scoop of cranberry, slap it on that turkey, rub it in.
Say, what's your
chow it
opinion?
down.
What's your opinion on ESG? That's all you need to say.
You know what most people are going to say? And they're going to say, MSG? Is there any MSG in this food? We had that.
Wow, the puns are
Good
still
tries.
here. They're still here. Well, I'm going to jump into the segue because both of you dropped it
Jump into the segue or the monologue?
both. I'm going to segue
Segue
into. I'm going to jump
monologue.
into the segue
Okay,
and then
hold
my
it.
monologue.
Shake
Yeah.
the rust off.
Yeah, see, exactly. We should have
Everyone's
recorded.
loving it.
Yeah,
Go for it.
it's
And
gonna be
by the
great.
way, anybody that doesn't have an opinion on this subject needs to get one.
I don't think people
because this
know
is
about it.
this is coming at. It's been around, but the
Uh-oh.
no, not broken, not broken. Just thinking through. I was either going to say este, but it's coming at people fast. It's going to hit you right in the face.
Yes.
Bottom line.
Yeah, it is. And that's on that note, that is exactly what she said. Hello. How are you? Can I empathize with you today? Can we move forward together, holding hands towards a future where everyone's well-being, existence, and success is thought of by everyone, everywhere, all the time? You see, I believe in positive mental attitude. In so much as I pretend that I can unilaterally exist amongst the Borg of like-minded people who have all gotten their perspective from a Tony Robbins cereal box. I empathize with you. I'll support you. I'll believe in you until you do something that I'd prefer you don't do, like think for yourself. In today's corporate world, there's an extreme desire to be everything up to and including a place of work for your employees. Many companies have work retreats, bonuses, unlimited time off, special speakers, alcohol. Hell, I'm surprised there isn't a monthly fee for being a part of your workplace religion. The sky is literally the limit because corporate America has become the ultimate helicopter parent. Ironically, the same seems to hold true with our social betters in the federal government. The innate social pressure of resisting to have children has in turn created a nanny-like state think tank of entitlement, privilege, hypocrisy, cyclical, and often nonsensical belief systems. The civic responsibility of care for your fellow countrymen has been replaced with broad, all-encompassing slogans of corporate social responsibility or environmental social governance. The idea of character and intelligence has been replaced with carefully and curated nonsense like intelligent quotient and emotional intelligence, both of which mean absolutely nothing if you ignore the contextual control schemes behind them. In each of these ideologies, there are hidden mantras that are inescapable, and that's an issue. Emotional intelligence, for example, discusses one's ability to empathize with others, but you fundamentally cannot empathize with someone if you have not been in their exact circumstance. Yet, if I were to sympathize for someone, those exact people would consider my sympathy a threat to their positive worldview. For a last and final example, how about courage? People with high emotional intelligence exhibit courage, except they don't because they fall in line behind the largest government overreach and transition of wealth in the history of humanity. All of these frilly socially constructed rule books are merely a means of control. Success doesn't exist in a vacuum, neither does emotional capability, civic duty, and doing what's right. What I've found in most cases is that these researched views are merely a form of soft oppression in order to peacefully generate results for the very people who created these rules, yet don't follow them themselves.
Poignant.
I struggled through that one. That was rusty as hell.
I would tell you, usually I say, hey, that was a very good job. And I mean it every time.
That was rough.
That was your best one.
Oh, well, thank you.
That was absolutely, I don't mean you didn't have a couple of stumbles there. We all do. I certainly do when I introduce myself. but you hit on kind of one of my biggest pet peeves in the world. It's this cyclical nature of the people that are in power creating the circumstances to generate kind of a perception from the masses to make the masses think that something good for them is happening at the same time while it's benefiting only one segment of our society.
Yeah, it's 3-card money.
And okay, simplify it down to that. It's a shell game. Mm-hmm. And I think that there's a natural way to see through some of this stuff, but I think most people either are not aware because of the lack of this information being disseminated properly, or they're in an apathetic state, consumed by other technologies that keep them we'll discuss that a little bit too. Keep them occupied otherwise.
Yeah. I think this was, for our listeners, the reason why we're talking about this today is one, because it's interesting, and two, because I think corporate social responsibility, and specifically environmental social corporate governance, because that's the actual name for it, I think they're tied together. I think one is a precedent to the other. And I am not here to say that both are bad, because I think there are positives to some of these things. With that being said, I do think there is a miscommunication on behalf of those who create these rules for us, because that's what they're doing, to explicitly state that some of their adamantly decided strategies are not as clear as they claim they be, if that makes sense. So yeah, Beowulf, you've been silent over there. What do you think?
I mean, thank you. I needed some monologue music. ESG stuff is growing, and it will continue to grow. And I know I was talking to you earlier today about the CSOs, the new really great chief officer position you can get at a company. Basically, you're a chief sustainability officer. And your whole job is to manage these big, lofty, noble, but oftentimes a little pie in the sky goals for a company.
Yeah.
Usually a company that has little to nothing to do with these kind of goals. Their main priority as a company is to sell something, so you have to look at these types of things as, is this a PR move?
Yeah.
Or is it actually their goal as a company is to change the climate? PepsiCo, I'm sorry, I don't think their goal as a company is to make sure that we don't have, massive hurricanes.
Yeah.
That may be a hot take.
Well, but see, that's where Beowulf might be incorrect, because here at PepsiCo, we believe in passing on the
PepsiCo.
Well, passing on the sociabilities, sociabilities, which is social responsibility, which I created just right now, to our founding fathers, not to the people after us, because we believe that we can pass guilt backwards, just like we can believe passing climate change can go backwards too, because we don't know anything about science.
A lot of companies are doing things for entirely, and you said PR, which is interesting, but it also reflects something that goes to the bottom line.
Well, sure.
I mean, this is all profit motive.
It's 100%. Profit motive.
Or
it's control motive.
Distraction, profit motive, balancing the equation between what you have. PepsiCo's a great example. What the hell is that, right?
Didn't Kendall Jenner solve...
What is PepsiCo?
Didn't Kendall Jenner solve...
It's the second largest beverage company in the world.
But didn't she solve racism?
What is the beverage? Think about that a second.
Sugar.
Love.
Syrup.
It's sugar, syrup, and water.
Well, my point is, I truly don't think that the majority of people who are maybe like, say, for example, let's take the CSO of PepsiCo, since I'm picking on them today. I can't remember his name
Kendall
right now.
Jenner.
I read an article about him today. It's not Kendall Jenner.
Go ahead.
But I read an article about him today, and I'm just picking on him because he's fresh on my mind. I don't think that he necessarily has bad intentions here. Not at all. I think ESG goals are great, but I also think the bottom line is more important than sacrificing your entire profits for the betterment of humanity.
Trust me, none of these companies would do any of this stuff unless it translated into either maintaining or growing their bottom line.
Yeah, it's true.
There is no other motive for a company. Companies are just entities in whichever state they're in. Are you going to turn off this music anytime?
No, you know what's really funny? You know what's really funny? Is you could say anything over this music, and I am about to buy 500,000 stocks in your company.
Isn't that what it comes down to?
Here's the thing, is I could come out on stage, and I could be like, welcome, everyone, to the latest research on how all of you in the audience have terminal cancer. And every single one of them might be stoked on it because of this music.
You know what the solve for that terminal cancer is?
ESG.
More lycopene.
PepsiCo.
And what comes from lycopene? Where does lycopene come from?
Sugar.
It's predominant. No.
Tomatoes. My favorite brand ever.
We really forcing this?
The Tomato Wellness Council.
Okay. Yeah.
Just saying.
Wellness, tomatoes.
No, but what my point was, I don't
have totally
think,
lost it. I'm just singing along with this tune now.
See, I told you.
I don't think ESG, environmental social governance, these goals that these corporations are putting out there, because now they're putting them together, and so like investors, stock, shareholders, they can actually research all of this. The idea is to be more visible, clarity here in who you invest. And I don't even think that's necessarily a bad thing. It's just, I think you have to understand, as someone who's a potential shareholder of a public company, that this is not necessarily about the noble cause.
Let me read you something here.
Well, wait a second. Wait a second here. Okay.
Yeah, we're rusty.
We are jumping way ahead here. Okay. Because
what do you mean we're jumping ahead? You got a whole train of information coming.
I do.
This is just
it's a train.
A little something into a boxcar.
Let the bull talk.
It's a train on a path
to
a beautiful field, and above that field is a sun, and that sun is actually a baby, and in the baby's hand is a bottle of Pepsi. That's how we solve it, guys. That's how we solve all the problems in the world. We have everyone drink Pepsi, and we can all harmonize together.
There used to be a song from Pepsi. I'd like to teach the world to sing in perfect harmony. Or is that Coke?
Wow.
That's definitely Coca-Cola. We're turning up the music
What's
now.
the real
What
thing?
is the little bit you'd like to share?
You were
real fast?
talking about CSOs,
Yes.
sustainability officers,
Yes,
right?
Yes.
So the funny thing, look, we can talk about almost any subject in the world, and you end up qualifying its baseline by follow the money, right?
Yeah.
Corporations do not make decisions for the betterment of society unless it betters themselves too.
Yeah.
Right.
Either in comparison to competition or within their own structure of their own motivation to move their business forward in whatever manner possible. And then you talk about most of these large companies are public companies.
Well,
And there's a public aspect to that we will get talking to. But let me just read this real quick. The value of sustainability reporting. Research has shown that investing in sustainability reporting has a potential to increase financial performance, attract new customers and investors, engage employees, increase innovation, and give companies a competitive advantage. This comes from the Boston College Center for Corporate Citizenship, which has resources and tools that you need to determine what framework you'll work on, blah, 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 blah. Basically what it's saying is, look, there's three parts to this. If you have value and sustainability within a company, you're looking for financial benefits, business benefits, or stakeholder benefits, and that breaks down to several different things, but they all come down to the bottom line is, can I borrow more money? Can I make more money? Can I have less variability in my budgeting process for my employees, my stakeholders, all that kind of thing? That's what it comes down to.
Yeah.
So anybody that believes that these corporations are suddenly turning into these wonderful philanthropist companies, they're full of shit. They don't know what they're talking about.
Well, think about it. Sorry, just real fast, Wolf.
That's okay.
Real fast.
That's fine. I'm just we're starting over. I'm joking.
No, think about it. These are all public companies, right? A public company has an obligation to its shareholders to grow.
Not all of them.
The whole
They're not all
point.
public.
Not all of
yeah.
them are public.
No. Okay. I know.
most.
I'm speaking of PepsiCo and companies like that are public. They have an obligation to grow.
Stakeholders.
Yes. And that means if stakeholders who are only concerned with their shares going up in value.
Well, here's the problem. A stakeholder encompasses a shareholder, but a shareholder is not a stakeholder.
That is correct.
Stakeholder is society, it's community, it's government, it's anybody that can hold you to account for the mistakes that you've made that they have tied to some ethereal rules that they made up this last year. That's really what it is.
Yeah, that's a big differentiation and important to talk about, because shareholders just simply means you own a very sliver of whatever it is we're talking about.
So,
right.
To her point, to your point, Beowulf, the shareholders are what should matter the most out of all the things. But the problem right now, and our listeners and viewers may or may not agree with me, those things have flipped. The stakeholders have become the primary focus. And that's why ESG, and eventually, as we'll discuss in a second, corporate social responsibility have become issues, because they have trended from having good intentions to being invasive and ultimately economically debilitating.
Big words.
I think you're right on track here, and we should get into some of your notes and start discussions, because we could go off in a million directions, and I have plenty to say about all the directions we can go.
Yeah,
but I want to be clear from my position that I think in companies, for as long as they've existed, have looked both externally and internally to try to develop systems, processes, patterns, etc., to try to sustain more effective, more efficient ways of producing what they do.
Yeah.
And that includes sustainability issues that actually are things that company is supposed to be part of.
Yeah.
Right? If you're making a widget over here and it has nothing to do with that sustainability goal over there, you shouldn't have to deal with that in one aspect. But that's all getting conflated now, and we'll talk about that.
It's being politicized, and we'll talk about that. But I think one thing we should address before diving into ESG is I think we should talk about its predecessor, which I believe to be corporate social responsibility. Now, for our listeners and reviewers, corporate social responsibility initially began to take shape in the 1950s, specifically in 1953. But the framework for it has been around, according to some, for almost 2 centuries. Now, concern for society on behalf of corporations began specifically in the Industrial Revolution, which was a time worthy of criticism. It was obvious at the time, specifically to the mid to late 1800s, that working conditions, worker safety, and employment of women and children in the emerging factory system was becoming a disturbing problem. Many reformers during that time saw that these bad working conditions and employment practices were leading to social problems, poverty, and potential labor unrest. Now, philanthropy at that time also began. Cue the large donations from Andrew Carnegie, a man that was known for donating large portions of his wealth to education and scientific causes, and John D. Rockefeller, gosh, I can't talk today, who also donated more than $500 million in the 1800s to religious, educational, and scientific causes. Now, on a side note, I would like to point out to some people how much $500 million in the 1800s actually is. It is quite astonishing. For literal comparison, $1 in the 1800s for buying power equates to $23.56 today. If my math is correct, it might not be, because I am not a biologist. $500 million that time would equate to roughly $11,700 million today. I almost said $1,000, which was a lot more than that. In buying power, which would net you the Miami Marlins, which is $980 million. It would also net you the most expensive house in America, called The One. That is so stupid. Which has 20 rooms, 30 bathrooms, a 36-seat movie theater, a bowling alley, a 30-car garage, and a 100,000 square foot nightclub in your home. And that house is $500 million.
Why?
Because whoever buys that is madly in love with their mirror, their reflection. You could also get some exquisite art, like a Salvator Mundi, which recently sold in November of 2017 for $450.3 million, or a Picasso for $179 million. You could get a super yacht, which is about $600 million. And then you could also buy a private island in the Bahamas. And you could also buy Buckingham Palace, which is roughly equated to about $2 billion or $6 or $5 billion between that. No one's quite sure, because the Queen is no longer around, so they don't know who to ask.
I don't know if the family's willing to sell.
If you gave them that money, they probably would be. But with that being said, you could buy all of those things and still have anywhere from $3 to $6 billion left over. That's how much money super alien lizard hybrid evil Satanist John D. Rockefeller gave to philanthropic.
It's just enough for extra guac on your Chipotle bowl.
Yeah. You want to think a little bit about why he did what he did.
Because he's evil.
Well,
apparently,
there's some quotes that are denoted to him. I don't have it off the top of my head, but basically he wanted the educational system to be there for the masses to create what?
Workers.
A bunch of people who you could boss around.
Workers.
Yeah.
Same thing.
Not people that think.
People who
people that work.
And nothing has changed.
And that's what and I don't blame him for that. If you think about where his position was, Carnegie, him, others, what position they were in, they were at the top of this industrial revolution, making bazillions of dollars. What did they need? They need freaking workers, man.
Yeah.
That's what they needed.
They could have founded AI then.
Are you a Rockefeller apologist?
So here's
yeah, right. Me.
So ironically enough, even though I've given Rockefeller a lot of kudos for how much money he gave away, because that is an ungodly amount of money he gave to charity. Ironically enough, this is also when Karl Marx's belief of Marxism and socialism came into existence. Are they connected? Maybe, but that is probably for another episode. But with that being said, there was a specific catalyst when it came to corporate social responsibility. Now, the father of CSR, who founded it in 1953, his name is Howard Bowen, and he published something called Social Responsibilities of the Businessman in the 1970s, which brought about the proliferation of CSR. In 1971, according to thomasnet.com, the concept of the social contract between businesses and society was introduced by the Committee of Economic Development. This contract brought forward the idea that companies function and exist because of the public consent, and therefore there is an obligation to contribute to the needs of society. In 1979, Archie Carroll, creator of the Carroll's Pyramid of CSR, speculated that the social responsibility of business encompasses the economic, legal, ethical, and discretionary expectations that society has of organizations at a given point in time. By the 1980s, CSR evolved into a soft version of what it is today, with businesses incorporating social interest in their business practices while becoming responsive to stakeholders, not shareholders, if that makes sense. In 1986, William C. Frederick, one of the founders of CSR, claimed that the fundamental idea of corporate social responsibility is that business corporations have an obligation to work for social betterment. On a side note, Frederick believed in 4 types of CSR. The first one was corporate social responsibility. The second one was corporate social responsiveness. The third one was corporate social rectitude. And the fourth one, he proposed this to be consciousness, so cosmos, science, and religion. He wondered if the last version was a bridge too far, stretching beyond the reach of interest of CSR scholars, but he argued that it will depend on the intellectual and philosophical flexibility of the CSR inquiry, and only the future will tell. So, he's no longer with us, so I can say this about him. I think he might have been crazy. With that being said, there's clearly a little bit of an overreach with some of these things, because I have always believed that corporations, much like in some of the tax filing statuses, are separate entities from the individuals that own them. With that being said, I find it completely ironic that we treat these organizations like one would treat their fellow countrymen, and that we hold them to expectations that are in flux.
From a legal standpoint, they are. I don't know if this is all 50 states, but I know in most, they are considered legal entities separate from the individuals that own them, with the same rights and or responsibilities as an individual.
Which is why sometimes when employees sue a company, they also sue the owner.
Well, so here's what I think is interesting about that, because you made a good point there. In what world is an individual, single person, expected to be able to handle every single social problem within the world?
But that's okay.
You know what I'm getting at?
There's one thing. There's a difference between this engaging topic about corporations and ESGs and what individuals are responsible for. It's one is not responsible for more than the other, and that's where I think this thing is evolving to, and we'll get to that discussion. It's going from business to social, and it's being done in this country specifically because the government is not constitutionally allowed to do so. And I'm sure we'll talk about that as well.
Yes,
but ESG and CSR, honestly, it's been around for a very long time. I've known about it for a very long time.
Specifically the 50s.
All my lifetime and more. And really, it's been kind of a footnote for most companies in their annual reports.
Here's the problem, though, because you say it's a footnote.
Well, let me say, I'm not saying it's unimportant. I'm just saying that it was designed for a corporation, an entity, to do things within its own framework, with its own parameters, to correct things, primarily for the benefit of the employees. It's like
originally,
originally it's like a soft union-esque kind of application to make sure, like you said in the early industrial revolution, you don't want children and people that are being overworked and asked to do things, not asked, told to do things that is going to get them in harm's way.
Well, here's the thing. That's how it started, right? And I think it's a great idea. You want to protect your employees. You want workers, according to John D. Rockefeller, that are never ending, that you can teach to work like a hive mind. Indefinitely at PepsiCo.
I knew the music was
For
coming.
if you can't pay them enough money or give them enough health care, you can give them Pepsi. And Pepsi, as we know, inevitably solves all health problems by ending your life.
By the way, I love the term hive mind.
It is like a board.
Comes from bees.
Yeah.
Right.
So,
but
it's similar.
did you guys see this thing recently about what bees do to giant hornets that are trying to kill them?
Yeah. Yeah, where they like hive around them and then pull them apart.
No, they hive around them, and these are hornets that try to kill them. They go into their hives, try to kill them. The bees form a ball around them, and then they start flapping their wings to heat up the core inside them, and it literally fries the hornet inside them without killing themselves.
Interesting.
That's the Borg, man.
Yeah.
That's the collective.
Well, and that's what we all did in response to critical thinking in the last 2 years. So in 1991, this is when CSR specifically kind of changed. And I want to make it very clear to our listeners and our viewers, I am not making an argument against what would be considered the original perspectives of corporate social responsibility. What I am making an argument against is what it currently is today. With the University of Pittsburgh professor Donna J. Wood, she published Corporate Social Performance Revisited, which expanded and improved on early CSR models by providing a framework for assessing the impacts and outcomes of CSR programs, according to thomasnet.com. Also in 1991, University of Georgia Archie B. Carroll published his article, The Pyramid of Corporate Social Responsibility, expanding upon areas he believed were crucial when implementing CSR in an organization. By 2000, Wells Fargo, Coca-Cola, Disney, and Pfizer, just to name a few, all incorporated these ideas and concepts into their business processes. All companies, which 100% have never violated in extreme ways any of the proposed ideas of CSR in the last 22 years. According to Donna J. Wood, the basic idea of corporate responsibility, social responsibility, is that businesses and society are interwoven rather than distinct entities. Therefore, society has certain expectations for appropriate business behavior and outcomes. And I disagree. The reason I disagree is because, wait a second, corporate social responsibility is supposed to be ethical, right? And sometimes there's a difference. There is ethical legality, there is unethical legality, there is ethical illegality, and there's unethical illegality. And with that being said, the last 2 years have shown to me that these corporations, specifically the ones that decided to fire people for invasive medical practices, don't care about corporate social responsibility. They only care about what the big guy in the office tells them to do. That's what I
disguise that in corporate social responsibility.
So they're lying.
Because what they're doing is they're taking a specific viewpoint and saying this is responsible, as opposed to any opposing viewpoint.
Yeah,
and that's the slippery slope. That
it's
we're
soft
talking
oppression,
about.
Is what it is.
I don't even know if it's soft anymore.
Can't
Not anymore,
you
maybe.
consider any of these CSR ideas to be a benchmark if like a leadership position or an executive can't meet this, or maybe it's not even for that exact thing, but they use it as an example to get rid of somebody.
Yeah.
For example, much smaller level, and it's not even an ESG or CSR related, but there was a Amazon thing that happened just a couple of months ago where an employee filed a lawsuit against Amazon because they got fired and blah, 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 blah. But the Amazon argued they fired him because of a clause in their entire thing saying no cursing on the job, which really you fired
the dumbest fucking.
But the guy is
so
saying
normal.
I know, but the guy is saying you fired me because I was participating in organization of our Staten Island.
Well, here's the thing.
Right.
And so the judge didn't reinstate him, but they said, Amazon, you're definitely retaliating against employees that are trying to organize. But they're using that clause.
But I don't know if that's necessarily
we
corporate.
always do that.
Yeah, I don't know if that's necessily corporate social responsibility.
I think that's a little different. But I think her point is interesting because these things get conflated in a way. What a lot of this stuff is to your point, Amazon's contract or agreement or whatever Bale is talking about was put in place so not because they wanted to use it, just because it was there in case they had to.
Yeah, well, that's my point with this too. I know it's like a much smaller scale, but wouldn't these things could be easily used to get people out of their circle they don't want in their circle anymore?
Well, here's what's interesting, because I've read a lot about this, specifically because I'm taking a class on it right now. I have a problem with a lot of these things because they're tongue in cheek. They'll say something and not mean what they say. So a prime example I brought up emotional intelligence in my monologue. Mm-hmm. Same thing with intelligence quotient. There's recently been studies specifically with emotional intelligence and emotional quotient that have come up maybe in the last 10 to 15 years, because it's from my understanding, a relatively new social belief system that has come about, where it talks about the ethical nature of being able to interact with people from a affirmative or a aggressive or a passive aggressive or a passive way, right? And someone who is a leader, according to the belief system of emotional intelligence, which ties into corporate social responsibility, is someone who has the ability to work in all those things. But my belief system, though, is that leaders create the rules. They don't necessarily follow them. And if you sit together with a group of people in your company and you own the company and you tell everyone that they need to have a high emotional quotient or they won't have their job, and you need to tell everyone that they need to abide by the rules that you create, but you don't follow your rules, which most of these, sorry for this language, fucks don't do, then you don't really believe in it. So my whole thing is these companies like Amazon and Pfizer, specifically Pfizer, they don't care what their social impact is, as long as it makes them mucho dinero.
Back to my point.
Which, my point to your point is, why do they even have it if not to provide a form of either soft or hard oppression to their constituents, so their constituents can listen to the rules for thee, but they don't have to listen to any rules for me. That's what I see it as.
You mentioned your monologue, Tony Robbins, and the emotional quotient, and what was the other one? EQ, and it doesn't matter. You mentioned what up until recently were termed self-help. Mm-hmm. Okay?
Yep.
Now just think about that term.
Empathy.
Self-help
is what I mentioned. Empathy.
That you did that so right on the nose. Mm-hmm. So right on the nose. Everybody has conflated that word to act like everybody needs to be empathetic for everybody in every way in every shit. People don't even understand what the fucking word means. Excuse my language.
As long as you listen to the rules that they tell you to listen to.
Correct. But set that aside for a minute. The whole point is that these things, Tony Robbins has some great stuff. Mm-hmm. If you want to use that to impact your view on life and how you want to process your view on life so that you can move your career forward, or you can be the next inventor, or you can write your own book or whatever. All these things are great to dilute the negatives that come at you circumstantially every day, all the time.
Yeah.
Nothing wrong with that. Love it. I've read a book of the first emotional quotient book that came out. I don't remember the author, but I read it at the time. I thought, what a great developmental tool for people, individuals, that is. When it becomes a problem is when it stops being self-help and starts being demanded. Mm-hmm. That's where this goes. That's where the real problem with this stuff is.
Well,
it stops that soft oppression you're talking about. To me, it's that shell game. It's the 3-card Monte. It's the government wanting to push a certain type of process or pathway for the masses. Go ahead.
Bull, you can travel. You can get on a plane. As long as you do what we tell you to do. I mean, I know right now it's medical. I know right now, like, not a lot of people like shots. So I know, like, you're hesitant. And we're not even really sure what's in this shit. But you have to take it, because if everyone takes it, then we're all doing what I say. And if you do that, then I'll reward you with being able to leave the country.
And here's the thing, okay? If enough people said, this is absolute bullshit, and let's not, everybody in this room and everybody we know and everybody we can talk to, let's simply not travel if that mandate is coming out.
Then it doesn't happen again.
Exactly.
Yeah, no, I get
because it all goes down to dollars and cents.
Yeah, and that's why I think this stuff is so intimidating and disturbing, frankly. Because, look, I don't want to make this about the thing that happened that we can't mention unless we be flagged by any entity that is an entertainment platform.
You've already mentioned it.
I understand, but I can't. There's a certain word I can't say because if I say that
exactly.
S word, then they might think I'm talking about guns. But anyway, it's just. I guess my biggest point is it's like everything is so coercive, and CSR is just as coercive as ESG. Because here's the thing: if I buy a shirt from somebody as a consumer in a capitalistic, supposedly free market society, you know what I'm not doing when I look at the shirt? I'm not considering the impacts of whether or not that shirt is going to destroy the Amazon, or whether or not that particular shirt, the revenue from it is going to go to social programs. I'm not considering that. Yet here's the funny thing.
But you will.
Well, I will because they'll force me to.
That's exactly
But what's
right.
fun, and that's the scary thing about it. But what's funny about all of it, there's been plenty supposed research platforms or supposed polls, right? I read one recently that said 83% of consumers care about where their money goes. You know what I say to that? Baloney.
Bullshit.
The reason I say baloney is because, okay, if that's the case, you wouldn't be buying from Amazon, which is the largest company in the world.
Which
you
is
wouldn't
just
be
selling stuff from like Alibaba.
Oh yeah, you wouldn't be
Literally.
you wouldn't be using stuff. No offense to Tesla, you wouldn't be buying Tesla cars because last time I checked, coal is just as destructive as carbon. Or coal is carbon.
It takes the energy level of 3 barrels of oil to produce a battery for an electric car.
I know, and that's the thing. Is it's like this 3-card Monte thing is so frustrating to me because if I were to sit at if I were to walk into a tech company right now and get a job and sit down, I can guarantee you they'd have me take a personality test like the Big Five or some other personality test that, no offense to sociologists, in my opinion, is based on total bullshit.
No offense.
Because here's the thing.
No offense, but it's total bullshit.
But here's the thing, and the reason I say it's total bullshit is because these are antiquated things. Like climate change is not a monolith. Climate change, if we humans were not here, wouldn't exist. Just like if a tree fell down in a forest.
Climate change would exist no matter whether we're here or not.
But what I mean by that is, the whole tree, if it falls down in a forest, does it exist type argument. The reality is the only reason climate change is such a major issue, one, is because it's politicized. It shouldn't be. Science should never be politicized, in my opinion. 2, it's because it's a very conveniently easy, soft form of oppression to push your policy agenda initiatives from interest groups that pay you and fund your company and fund your political campaign to get policy pushed that you won't have to be accounted for in the next 30 years because you won't be around. That's what I think it comes down to. I'm not bringing it there, but I'm saying it from the people that like the Pelosi's of the world. They're only pushing it because they get bank from it. And the same with this CSR stuff. Like, look, if I sit down with someone and I don't agree with their perspective, especially when it comes to critical thinking, which critical thinking specifically, and from my perspective, you can correct me if I'm wrong, Bull, specifically is the ideology and the strategy of learning from your opposition, not trying to destroy your opposition, but it is also in understanding what they're actually saying as opposed to, just accepting things verbatim without thinking about it.
I know there's a strict definition to critical thinking. I've always believed it's simply pausing and actually moving emotions off to the side and thinking about whatever the subject is before you make decisions or you reference things that could be conflated a different way. You critically think about something.
Yeah.
Do we do it all the time? No. We're all emotional animals. A lot. But that's why it's an actual subject, critical thinking.
Yeah.
Now, a lot of people have used that and created a lot of tangential things that are not so good to go after, critical this and critical that, and we could talk about that in another podcast. But ultimately, the idea here is and this is part of what we're talking about today. The idea is to think about these things and understand not only what they are, but what their effect is on all of us and where we see it going. Because all the people that talk about don't do this or this slippery slope will happen and all these things will occur, Jesus, they're freaking right. Because that's what ends up happening. What ends up happening is you push an agenda, you stretch the stretch to the limits of what you can get away with, and now you've reset the baseline. So now you can continue to push off in a direction. And sooner or later, the direction is nonsense.
Well, and that's why I think, like, as much as I think Donna Wood or Professor Wood might have some credence in what she says, this is where I think things get a little bit crazy. And I think I want to touch on this before we jump directly into ESG, because it will segue quite nicely. So there's a few principles of corporate social responsibility. The first principle is legitimacy. Society grants legitimacy and powers to business. In the long run, those who do not use power in a manner which a society considers responsible will tend to lose it, supposedly. I don't believe that. I think people who use power irresponsibly continue to stay in their position because they work the rules to favor them. If that were the case, we wouldn't have incumbents that have been in office for 40, 50, 1,000 years. We wouldn't have people that have been senators and governors becoming president. If that were true. So that's a false premise in my opinion. Now, the level of application, according to Donna J. Wood, is institutional based on a firm's generic obligations as a business organization. That focus is obligations and sanctions, and the value defines the institutional relationship between businesses and society and specifies what is expected of any business. I don't think that I would ever ask a doctor to give me advice on what to do if I were to go on a rocket ship up into space. Because a doctor, especially a physician's assistant or a common physician, is not going to know, in most cases, unless they are specialized, what space's effect and G-forces will have on my body. And I don't think it's fair to act as if businesses should be in the business of dictating how their employees and society around them should operate in relation to their decisions.
Well, I had a follow-up doctor appointment just this morning on something, and when I walked in, and I knew this subject we were talking about, so I specifically sat down with the guy that was out front, and I gave him my information, everything. I said, "Hey, I want to see what your scores are." And he said, "What are you talking about?" And I said, "I want to see how responsible you are as a company to your community." And he didn't know what the hell I was talking about.
Yeah.
And do you believe anything I'm saying right now?
No.
No, I didn't do that.
I know you didn't.
But I might.
You should.
I might, and I probably should. And you know what? I honestly don't care.
I don't think anyone does.
If that doctor is a good doctor, if he is selling the right thing that I need to buy and it's effective for me, I don't care what the business is. I honestly don't care whether you donated to Greenpeace or you donated to the NRA. And I don't care which.
You know what's funny? And this is something that I don't think people... And look, I'm not yet in the business of raising kids. Hopefully, there one day, quite soon. With that being said, I think the problem that I have with all this, Bull, is that there seems to be this, specifically from my demographic, supposedly, my demographic and demographics after us, there seems to be this understanding that we all care so much for the earth and so much for the future of humanity.
Okay, let me ask you both of you, is that real?
Let me get to my point, because I can tell you right now it's not. We care so much about the future of existence and humanity that we do everything correct. That we need Tom's Shoes to donate their shoes to people who don't have shoes. That we need Sears or Pepsi or Chia Pets to come back and be all about the environment, without acknowledging that a lot of the practices that we have today are actually renewable practices. Like, for example, if I cut down a tree and replant the tree, it is a renewable resource.
Trust me, there's more trees out there now than there was 100 years ago.
But there's a group of people that doesn't want us to cut down the trees. It doesn't want us to do any of this stuff because it's not renewable enough. And my question, we love all this so much that we don't have kids and will inevitably die off if nothing changes.
No, not once we reach LEV.
I don't think we will.
But all the people that wanted to not cut the trees down, Bale, are the same people that wanted all the plastic bags in the grocery stores.
Yeah.
Which are the same people now that think that's going to kill everything.
Well, now we're back to paper bags.
Correct.
Well,
so it's all it's all a con.
Because
it's all a scam.
Because supposedly they believe they push the agenda enough so that we replace all the trees. And we're doing but you know what I'm saying? There's circular argument. No, if somebody is an activist in a certain way and they use all their emotions to do that, nothing will ever satisfy. You can reach whatever goal they set And now the goal's new.
Because they're addicted to activism.
Well,
they're addicted to activism. There's no... Let me go ahead, Beowulf.
There are just two very specific examples I can think of where I first started paying attention to the cultural obsession over this type of thing.
I know where you're going with this. Do I know where you're going with this?
I don't know.
I know where you're going with this.
Two very specific examples on either side of the coin, truly. The first one I could think of is when it became headlines that Chick-fil-A was donating to anti-LGBTQ organizations or whatever. And then there was a group of people who wanted to boycott it. And in some ways, there was a bunch of people who wanted to go to it more to prove a point and all sorts of whatever. That was maybe almost 10 years ago now. And then the other example I can think of on the other side of the coin was when Starbucks got rid of Merry Christmas on their cups during the holiday season. And there were a bunch of people who wanted to boycott Starbucks because they didn't believe in, Christmas.
A pagan holiday originally. Oh, right. That's a whole nother episode.
So it's just interesting because on one hand, it was you don't have enough of this social responsibility. If we're looking at the S and ESG, I know we're not talking quite about ESG.
Well, it's a segue. It is a segue into ESG.
And the other one was, it's wrong. It's not that you don't have any. It's just it's not the right one. So it's just those were the first two incidents that I think, at least personally, I remember there being a huge uproar over something that had nothing to do with coffee or chicken sandwiches. Right?
You know what I think. And you were going in a way where I'm familiar with, but you were not going to specifically what I think. But I think this is tying into it. You know what I remember was the first thing that people really got passionate about when it came to like social things, like activism.
Coney 2012.
And you know what's funny? Everyone I knew jumped on board. And again, that was the first time in my life where I found myself not jumping on board something. Wait a sec. There's a question I have for our viewers and our listeners. You can look this up. Everyone knows if they look it up and they actually follow up to these dumb social, cultural instances. What happened to Coney? Is he done being Coney? Is he done harvesting children or running a children army? Because I'm really sure the t-shirts fix that problem. Or is it that people are so obsessed with themselves that they have to tie themselves to something socially responsible? They have to have their corporations be socially responsible in order to feel good about their very existence. Is that what it is? Because last time I checked, I'm only here for, if things go well, 78 years. And last time I checked, it takes 1,000,000 years for a policy to take any sort of freaking impact whatsoever in society. So who am I to think that outside of my immediate application for people that I meet in my life, that giving $25 or buying a t-shirt that saves the whales will actually solve the problem? Because guess what? I can't follow that $25. No one will ever make it so clear that you can follow the path of the money that you give directly to the end result. They won't. There's always going to be something there that clouds things because they don't want you to know that they're actually paying their CEO $500 million a year. Because he definitely needs that to save the whales. Just like, I don't know, the CFO or the president or all the marketing directors need to be making $200,000 a year. These things that I don't think, and maybe I'm wrong, this could be my own bias. I just don't think this occurs to people when they choose to do something. Like, if I give $5 to a charity, I'm giving it with expectation that it goes to the people that they're willing to help. If I give $5 to a corporation, I'm expecting it to disappear into a black hole of nothing. Because it seems as if none of these problems ever get solved. Ever. They just continue to be problems. Always.
Well, think about it. These corporations, when they focus on these things, are usually donating money, large amounts of money to certain organizations. Mm-hmm. That's or political donors as well. Corporations are huge political donors.
Money's going to the politics. It's not going to those problems.
So, I mean, you have to ask yourself. It's the same thing that sometimes people say when you're checking out at a grocery store and they're like, "Would you like to round up?"
No.
And donate to XYZ organization. We can't explain to you what that organization is. You better know exactly what's going on off the top of your head because you've got about 2 seconds to figure it out. And we're going to embarrass you if you don't round it up. And, well, that a lot of people just do it just because. It's like,
because they feel guilty if they don't.
Well,
you know what? You know where I lie on this. We've talked about this before. I think that people that and this is both the soft and the hard activists. And what I mean by that, there are the loudies out there, the fringe loudies that are so emotionally captivated by things outside their own purview that their life becomes this other thing. And I think those people have so much internal issues that they can't even view themselves, and they have to, extrapolate that and convert that into energy in another direction. I think that's really what that's about. It's psychological.
Yes.
And then the rest of us get guilted, as you just said with the roundup thing, which I think is hilarious, because those entities that get the roundup, you realize that 99.9% of all those roundups, whatever money that turns into, it gets lost in the mix. Because most donations, it's their 501c3s, right? And so the 501c3 is supposed to send you a tax write-off amount that you pay. I mean, it's legal. But these roundup things, they never accumulate enough.
That's why
to do that. So guess what? It's all
where
there.
does it go?
Exactly.
You have to consider that. Like, I remember I was at a Red Robin or something. Some guys were walking around doing some sort of charitable thing, asking for money for something. I can't remember exactly what it was.
$12 candy bars for the local high school football team.
It wasn't quite that. I remember I did donate. They gave me a T-shirt, and they asked me if I wanted a receipt.
Here's the thing. Here's the thing.
For charity.
I would donate to the $12 because I know that goes to it goes to the football team. If it's legit football team and I can tie it back, I know that football team, I would donate to the $5. I'm more likely to donate.
Do you really think it's going to the football team?
No, it doesn't. I'm joking. I have never done that. With that being said, I feel better about that than I do about, looking at when I'm working at a company and having them talk about how, their paper that they're printing, because now this is Dunder Mifflin, is somehow saving all of the homeless in Saudi Arabia.
See, now here's the thing about this that you've got to kind of not unpack or try to pack, really, is that these different kind of influences that occur from a corporate standpoint, it's what you talked about earlier, Bale. This is all PR.
100%.
Because there is, I don't know what the equation is, the algorithm is, but there is a translatable effect on a business bottom line and profitability and everything that PR presents. Otherwise, people wouldn't do ads at all.
No.
This is a different form of that. It's a different form of showing yourself as socially conscious because you believe you've done some kind of analysis that says this is going to equate to either taking business from others or gaining with a certain focus group that you think your clientele really belongs to.
So I've got a question for you. Based on the principles of emotional intelligence with ties into corporate social responsibility, wouldn't that make the entity itself Machiavellian? Because that's supposed to be deceptive,
doesn't matter.
manipulative. Well, it does.
Well, look at it.
It does though, because
I don't think so.
Well, but here's the thing: Machiavellian individuals are deceptive. They're manipulative. If you're not being open and honest with somebody, because according to corporate social responsibility, according to their own argument, they have to be honest.
No.
Yes, they do.
Social responsibility has nothing to do with honesty.
It does.
It has to do with ticking off specific key indicators for these particular things.
I was thinking of ESG. Sorry. They're all the same.
It doesn't matter. ESG, CSR, doesn't matter.
Yeah, they're interchangeable.
They are benchmarks that the stakeholders, i.e., tangentially, the governments are pushing corporations and things into these positions to take these positions. And here's the thing that people don't kind of get their arms around. This stuff with the corporations, it doesn't fulfill anything with their bottom line except ticking off a box for the public sector to view.
Which, by the way, the public sector doesn't really give a shit about.
I don't think they do. Just that. I mean, look at the IRA right now, not the Irish Republic Army.
The terrorist organization.
No, I'm talking about the Inflation Reduction Act that was passed earlier this year. That act greatly
Have they not renamed that yet?
No, that's the name.
Oh my God.
Didn't do much inflation reducing, but
just wait till the current administration pitches the never mind. I was going to say the Hamas policy.
Nice. Wow. Could you have gone off the deep end?
They're already this whole thing is pitching communist policy anyway. We'll get into that in a minute.
Well, my point was
I want to touch on two things.
that that piece of legislation greatly rewards companies for example, bringing semiconductor manufacturing back to U.S. domestic soil, for example. Focusing on semiconductor and chip making is something that we need to go electric, which is what the current administration is pushing right now, and heavily, obviously. So by going, quote, green, these companies are now going to get tax breaks because of legislation like that, which is the point, which is what the federal government wants to happen. So it's a cycle there where they will be rewarded now financially, not just with public perception, or at least what is perceived public perception, because there can be an argument for public perception is usually way off from the reality. But it's not just that anymore. It's not just Twitter likes. It's also financial compensation in the form of tax breaks.
We'll get into that in a second, because that, in my opinion, is the pinpoint on all this ESG
which I think is why it's BS.
Greenwashing is a reality. It's not just some conspiracy theory people have made up. It's happening every day.
Well, before we jump into ESG, there's two things I want to touch on, because I mentioned the first principle of corporate social responsibility. I want to mention the other two. The principle of public responsibility, which businesses are responsible for outcomes related to their primary and secondary areas of involvement with society. And, well, someone's here. And the third principle of managerial discretion, which managers are moral actors within every domain of corporate social responsibility. They are obligated to exercise such discretion as available to them towards socially responsible outcomes. Godspeed, Beowulf. So with those views laid out, the problem that I have with this, there's two problems that I have with corporate social responsibility. CSR implies that businesses must be beholden to the very society that they serve in socially responsible ways. So sometimes moral, depending on who you ask, but that's what they must be beholden to. Yet what is considered socially responsible is constantly in a state of flux, insomuch that companies went out of their way to violate ethical and medical standards over the last 2 years that have stood longer than this ideology in favor of what was considered at the time socially responsible, but which has turned out to be incorrect 2 years after the fact. So the second aspect that I have a problem with is social responsibility is somewhat tongue-in-cheek. Many of these companies that claim to have significant moral and responsible standing amongst society have consistently violated their own perceived views over the last 20 or so years. Now, there are very varying levels of ethical quandaries associated with this accepted business ideology, most of which assumes that the responsible actions of today will be considered responsible tomorrow. They won't be, because that's not how responsibility works in our society. What we consider to be ethical, moral, and responsible today, I can guarantee will change by merit of the fact that our society doesn't care.
Let me give you a little anecdote with CSR. Okay. So, large corporation A is ticking off all the boxes on ESG or CSR. Doesn't matter. And they're being viewed by a particular segment of the population as an advantageous up and coming business because they're being modernized. They're, it's not, as they say, stale, pale in male, right? So they're becoming something else. They're becoming socially responsible. Their governance, their board is now made up of a equal portion of all ethnicities in the country and socioeconomic degrees and all that kind of stuff. And they're hitting all these marks. So they've got lenders just coming out of the woodwork, venture capitalists and lenders giving them money to try to increase their portfolios, increase their margins, increase their share of the market. So what they do is turn around and do hostile corporate takeovers.
Yeah.
Of all kinds of small entities. Mm-hmm. Now, how do you measure the ethical nature of that entity doing that? They've done exactly what the government wants them to do, and they've put people out of business that simply don't have the finances to do exactly what they're told to do.
Yeah.
I mean, it's so frustrating to me. It's unbelievable because it's measuring all the wrong things.
Yes.
The first measure of any business should be its overall reliability to its shareholders, not stakeholders. And what happens over time is if those responsibilities are fed by greed, fed by corruption, fed by a whole lot of other things, then competition tends to weed that out, and eventually they go away. And you can look at historically in the United States, that happens over and over and over again.
Yeah.
But now what you're doing is you're putting in place arbitrary rules that are very, very subjective. They're not objective; they're subjective.
Subjective. Yep.
And if they have an understanding and a CSO to manage that process, they are so far above anyone else. They could be doing everything else wrong, but if they get that CSO part right, you know what? The top ESG company in the country right now, you know what it is? Microsoft.
Oh, interesting.
Microsoft.
Wow.
How does that happen, Mr.
Not
Gates?
Not sure. Well,
It's not there anymore.
Before we jump into
Doesn't matter.
I know.
Yeah. Well, before we jump, he definitely has influence over it still. Before we jump into ESG, I do want to end it with a quote. This quote is from Margaret Thatcher. "We want a society in which we are free to make choices, to make mistakes, to be generous and compassionate. That is what we mean by a moral society, not a society in which the state is responsible for everything and no one is responsible for the state." The question I have is, but what if the state is the one that creates the very rules by which the businesses and ultimately society believe that they should be held responsible for? Doesn't that create a cycle of power in which it is impossible to account for since everyone has willingly agreed to the very whims that the state has imposed upon its constituents? It creates a cycle of do what I tell you to do and do it because I said so, because you should do what I told you to do, and that's because I said so. It's just a cycle, never ending. It's just a circle of bullshit.
That is what's called regulatory capture.
ESG.
It's exactly what it is. It's having a bunch of people that are responsible to set the parameters and rules for businesses to operate, and the businesses supporting the ability for those regulators to actually regulate by financially impacting them. So the question really is chicken or the egg, right? Is it the government doing this in starting that cycle? Or is it the public sector corporations doing this, which are actually governments also, by the way? If you look at
corporate
the way they're
governance,
all structured.
Economic, social, and corporate governance.
There's this, as you said, there's this circular kind of thing that happens, and you don't know where it stops or starts anymore.
Intentionally.
Exactly.
100%. And so for our listeners and reviewers, ESG, we mentioned this multiple times. It's environmental, social, and corporate governance. It's an umbrella term referring to the specific data designed to be used by investors for evaluating the material risk that the organization is taking based on externalities it is generating, according to Wikipedia. Now,
that
sounds
maybe
broad.
Define that even a little further. Environmental is, low carbon fuels, greenhouse gas emissions, energy efficiency, environmental management systems, biodiversity efforts, the climate risk, whatever the frick that means, water management. I don't know. Maybe, the water cooler is not as cool. I don't know. Recycling processes and emergency preparedness, which is very broad as well.
Yeah.
Social is health and safety, working conditions, employment benefits, diversity and inclusion. Again, kind of
broad,
very
all-encompassing.
Yeah. Human rights, which, let's talk about anybody that manufactures anywhere in
Doesn't
China.
Nike
right?
make their shoes in small South Pacific countries that they pay people pennies on the dollar to make the shoes for?
Impact to local communities, local environmental development, and then governments is ethical standards, board diversity and governance, corporate governance and policies, stakeholder engagement, shareholder rights, pay for performance, and political engagement.
Why in the world?
The number of things, the odd things that create those three segments conflict with each other constantly.
Yeah, it's contradictory. And what I see from ESG and what I see from CSR is what they're basically doing with these entities that are corporate companies and individuals at the end of the day is they're basically creating a 500-page policy push that no one's going to read. That's all they're doing. They're creating this area where they can say, well, yeah, but ESG says. But CSR says. Like if you don't abide by CSR or ESG, one, you're not a good company to work for, and two, well, we shouldn't suggest that people invest in your company, even if you have a great product.
Let me ask you this question, both of you. What division of a large company do you think actually runs the company? If you were to choose. There's a lot of divisions. I mean, there's operations and sales. There's manufacturing. There's HR. There's compliance. There's the claims people. There's collections. There's accounting. What do you think controls most large companies today?
HR.
That's what I would say. HR first, then accounting. And the funny thing is I get why that occurs. I do. I have enough business background to see and understand why. I also think it's dead wrong.
You know why, though? It's because the CEO and the president can hide behind their HR department. That's why.
Well, everybody needs...
But that's why I think it's that way. I don't think it's they actually control it. I think they say, okay, well, we're going to delegate to the institutions and organizations that we have within
our company. It doesn't matter why.
I don't think. Well, I think it does though a little bit.
If the CEO is hiding behind the HR department because he needs to fire a bunch of people and he knows they're all over 50, and so he has to eliminate the position instead of eliminate the person.
Yeah,
that's an HR decision, and it's recorded and viewed and monitored and managed and spreadsheeted and all that kind of stuff. It's a protection mechanism. Mm-hmm. Doesn't matter that it is; it still is.
Well, but that's what.
So the question becomes, and the reason I bring it up is the question becomes, what's going to govern companies going forward? Is it profit motive? Really?
No.
Or is it some ubiquitous thing? That's the wrong word.
Opaque.
There you go. An opaque thing like this ESG movement.
I will tell you exactly what it will be.
Everything.
The United Nations. An unelected group of governing people who were not elected there to the first place to make the decisions of the world government, because there's 17 policies associated with SDG that we'll jump into in a second. For our listeners, I do think it's important to clarify that ESG data can be used for a few different things. It can be used within an organization as metrics for strategic and managerial purposes. And it can also be used by investors when assessing material risks to the organization in their evaluation of enterprise value, specifically by designing models based on assumptions that the identification, assessment, and management of sustainability related risks and opportunities in respect to all organizational stakeholders leads to higher long-term risk-adjusted return. Which, doesn't that sound like a crock of absolute shit?
Risk-adjusted return. What does that mean?
No one knows, because they hire lawyers to write this shit to make it as complicated and ridiculous as possible, so no one can point to it and say, but that's the problem. So stakeholders include, Beowulf, back to your point mentioning shareholders and stakeholders, they include but not limited to customers, suppliers, employees, leadership, and the environment. Doesn't that sound a lot like corporate social responsibility? Doesn't that sound like the exact same thing? Because it does to me. It sounds like the exact same thing. I see ESG, just like I see corporate social responsibility, as coercive and actionable steps following the implementation of CSR. That's what I think it is. It's a coercive way of saying, well, you know what, you followed CSR, so you should follow ESG.
I think there's an additional element that ESG is bringing to the table that CSR did not.
Oh, of course.
CSR was primarily about talking about the corporation itself. Yes, there are tentacles out there that touch, outside entities, the city they're in, the country they're in, the states they're in, the people they affect, the communities they help try to develop and socially impact in one way, shape, or form. Now, ESG measures that more effectively, but it changes something. It changes in scope. So
yes.
ESG is... It's like currently at three scope levels.
It's like CSR 3.0.
Yeah, it's as you said, one's a precursor to the other.
Like if I was to join Scientology and I go in at the very beginning and I'm paying thousands of dollars to become like clear.
So you're level 13.
ESG would be like the clear level is what I'm getting at.
Yeah, so you've tested and made clear. Now that's the baseline for everything else. That's the CSR with ESG coming around the corner. And ESG is going to, as we said at the very beginning, hit everybody in the face. And we'll get into this a little.
You know what I think it should stand for? Corporate shitheads reacting to environment stupid guidelines.
Wow.
That's what I think. That's what I think it should be.
Kind of works for me. And we're not even sitting here debating any of the underpinning assumptions that say that we as human beings are really impacting our world as much as these people would like to say it's impacting, as 400 private planes landed in Egypt to talk about this a week ago.
Exactly.
Right.
Exactly.
So that's not even the argument we're talking about today.
But look, here, and we're not even talking about, but that's what gets me. Because it's like, I have to sit and listen to, Jeff Bezos. And I've got to sit and listen to Bill Gates. And I got to sit and listen to Barack Obama. And I got to sit and listen to Donald Trump. And I've got to sit and listen to Marco Rubio. And I got to sit and listen to all these people who are by proxy or directly involved to these things in which every single one of them, if I were to ask them what their advice would be, they would respond back to me with a Tony Robbins slogan. And I sit there and say, well, wait a second. Guys, you all have private jets. Wait a second. Guys, you all get paid after you retire indefinitely because you were part of the club. So what it tells me is, wait a second. None of you believe a single fucking thing you're saying. Because if I have to listen to the rules that you impose, but you don't have to listen to them, you know what that tells me? You don't buy the rules. You don't buy into them. And I don't have a problem if Elon Musk showed up tomorrow and said, guys, I'm going to adopt the principles of CSR and I'm going to adopt the principles of ESG, but I'm also going to get rid of my electric car, my luxury house. I'm not going to invest in anything. I'm not going to use money. I'm going to trade things like cattle or air. I would believe what he says. Just like if Joel Osteen was going to show up and say, I want you to be rich. And then the next day he shows up and says, but I'm going to give away all my stuff. Because the Bible actually says, if you want to follow me, you can't have any worldly possessions. If he did that, I'd take him seriously. No one seems to understand that these things that these people specifically are saying, I'm not criticizing them directly. I'm literally using them as rhetorical examples.
The world is full of
hypocrisy. It's
Absolutely.
annoying.
It's everywhere. And even those that think they're not being hypocrites are usually, think about most philanthropists in the world.
Bono.
They're extremely rich people.
Bono.
They're living a extremely wealthy,
affluent.
An affluent lifestyle, and they're doing good things. And I'm not criticizing that they're doing good things, but that does not give them the right to act like they're somehow superior in some way because they're doing those good things.
You know what's funny? I know everyone hates Rockefeller and Carnegie, and I'm making, people who are conspiracy theorists hate them, and maybe people who also believe in some level of changing physical economic patterns think that they're evil too. You know what I would assume? I would assume they gave all that money because, to your point, they'd had no use for it. But I would assume that they thought they were better, not because they're making better moral judgments, but because they just had a lot of money. And I would rather someone look at me and say, I have a lot of money, I'm better than you, than someone look at me and say, I am making the correct analysis. I am Bill Gates, and I'm making the correct analysis for the future of humanity. And because of doing that, by proxy of doing that, and even though I went to Epstein's Island a few times, I am better than you because I made those decisions.
I think people after a certain time period, a certain age, do two things. They both are legacy based. One is for their own family, and one is for the greater society.
Sure.
Depending on their wealth and what they're trying to do.
Sure.
And those things can be viewed like we were talking about the Rockefeller thing. He basically funded public education in the United States for a period of time, created the system in which it was developed into. And his own take was because we need workers. Well, I can look at that today and say, well, you don't want thinkers, because I've heard people say that. You want just workers. But at the time, he could have been saying, well, most people just want a freaking decent life and want to work. Well, and so is that a bad thing? Carnegie put half the freaking public libraries in the United States he funded.
Yes. Personally. And the funny thing I see about this is people look at those people as the originators, or like our founding fathers, the originators of trauma, the originators of abuse of power. And I say, no, what happened is they put together a system that worked effectively. And then people who were ridiculous came into the system, and just like this individual that we talked about with CSR, manipulated it to such a degree to mean something entirely different than what it meant originally. That's like when Constantine talked about the Bible. One day we should talk about this. And there is speculation that he influenced what it says and how it's been perceived.
About it at all. Of course it was influenced
but here's the thing, and the reason I say it is to protect my own self, okay? Because I'm going to have someone come up like, the Bible's been the same since the writing of it. No, it hasn't. It has not been. No. Fundamentally, it has not been. And with that being said, doesn't mean it's
the same until Gutenberg came around and made a printer.
Exactly. So
people just said it out loud or scribed it.
Exactly. So when it comes to stuff like this, I look at this whole scenario with these individuals who come out here with ESG and CSR. Do I think they have bad intentions? No, I don't. But I do think that they don't have an ability to accurately forecast, because no one can tell the future. So if I sit down CSR in the 1950s, or hell, if I thought of CSR or corporate responsibility, because that's what it originally was, if I thought of corporate responsibility in the 1800s because I didn't like seeing 8-year-olds being beaten after not working well enough, then yeah, that's probably something good. But if I see CSR now in the 1990s or 2000s or 2022, where I now, because I'm the CEO of a company, am at the will and the beckoning of the populace who, no offense, according to your point, Beowulf, is so off base when it comes to their predictions of what things actually mean and what percentage of things actually occur, then I'm beholden to nothing. It's mobocracy. You're introducing mobocracy you're politicizing corporate America. But with ESG, you're only forcing corporate America to do those things.
See, interestingly, and this may be, kind of different than some of the things I've said, but I'm not particularly against certain aspects of managing the viewpoint people have of your company.
No.
I think it's beneficial to the competitive environment you're in to have people view your company as responsible to a broader sense than its own four walls, right? So now I disagree with some of the ESG contentions because I think the underpinning argument is poor. Okay, that's a different conflict, different argument. But I agree with that in terms of, because when I was in sales to begin with in transportation, when I started out in sales, even before that, when I was selling on a sales floor at a department store, the fact is if I could talk to a client and I could differentiate myself either personally or my company from my competition in a way that the customer saw as beneficial to them, then they're going to buy something from me. So there's nothing wrong with having benchmarks and earmarks and things. And that's why people want a corporate environment that's welcoming, understood, philanthropic, if that's a word. Thank you. Philanthropic, etc. Philanthropic. Where am I?
It's okay. We're rusty. So it's first episode back.
So all those things are great. The challenge I see is when it's taken outside of your four walls. And that's what I have a problem with ESG, because there was originally Scope 1 ESG, which was internal. Scope 1 and 2 was primarily internal. Scope 3 is the problem, because Scope 3 takes the corporation and says, now the people you use to supply raw materials, transportation, logistics, compliance things, IT services, all these things, those outside companies that is not your core competency, it's somebody else's, they are now part of your score.
And here's the funny thing. According to ESG, and we'll talk about the 17 interlinked global goals, which are total nonsense, because they are just so ambitious. Those that you bring up a poignant point, because these things only apply to first world countries. They only apply to America. They're only going to apply to Western European countries. They're not going to apply to industrialized industries. They're not nations. They're not going to apply to those industries, those companies, those corporations, those individuals. So all you're doing is you're hamstringing first world to the point that we always talk about, bringing up the waterline to the baseline and taking the high level of individuals down to the waterline and making everything equal.
But that's
and
here's the thing. Globalist agenda.
Well, it's not even a globalist agenda.
It sure is.
I'm not. It's something more than that. It's an agenda of an oppressive group of people who, globalist or not, who cares, who want to eliminate the ability for people to move out of the shit that they've been in. We talk about, look, the beauty of capitalism is it gives you a medium to be able to create an entrepreneurial mode of transportation to get out of the personal situation and the financial situation that you are currently in if you want to. Now, granted, there are impediments, there are barriers. No one has ever said that every single person, unless you're talking about CSR, is meant to be a leader or an entrepreneur. No one has said that. Not a single person has said the American dream means that everyone's going to be a millionaire. Not a single person has ever implied that people who live here are going to live a luxurious lifestyle in the lap of endless luxury. No one's ever said that. The problem with ESG and the problem with CSR is what it does is it hamstrings individuals like myself who would like to start a business and have something for themselves. But God forbid if my little roadcaster here emits some level of carbon monoxide that I was not aware of because I didn't create it. It's an impediment. It's a medium. It's like a mediary between those who have the bourgeoisie, according to Marx, and those who have not, the proletariat. Now, granted, I don't agree with everything Marx says. In fact, I disagree with almost all of it. But I will say his analysis of those who have and those who have not is an accurate one, because that is true. And right now we have people like AOC, policy shareholders, doesn't matter, you can name a single one, I don't care who it is. Single individuals who are unilaterally imposing their will, to your point, like Klaus Schwab, who likes little boys. They're imposing wills that is of their own worldview upon everyone else, so people cannot transition into those positions that they have lived in their entire life. They have to be held down because they don't know better.
Because they are
the others. They're the others. Yeah,
they're the elites. And this goes back to kind of a theme that runs through a lot of our podcasts, because there's this group, and it changes all the time, and it's big and it's small, and it's in power, and it's an elite group that thinks they know better. And on some things maybe they do, and some things maybe they don't. But it's when somebody knows better, but we're in a free society according to what we think we are now, then you should have the right to choose. And those choices are being minimized, and we're being herded like frickin' cattle into a chute. Especially we all know where the cattle end up.
Yeah, especially from a corporate area. And the problem that I don't think people are realizing, as much as I know a lot of people dislike people who make a lot of money in this country for some reason, the statement of the rising tide raises all ships is a true statement. And when you impede companies and organizations, whether they're good or not, when you impede them, it harms you by proxy. Policymakers, in my opinion, are uphill from society, but the policy that they make trickles down. It's not going to avoid you, because I understand people.
There's a big mistake that's made by a lot of the population that looks at this and says, oh, these things are great for all these things that I emotionally support, and at the same time I'm getting a huge raise.
Are they though?
No, they're not.
That's what I'm saying.
Because they don't see that as they get the raise, as corporations have to inflate all their budgets to support all these different new industries, because that's what this is. ESG is a fucking industry. Yeah. Huge industry. There are companies that are doing nothing but collating information and adding personnel on the HR side into corporations just to do all this stuff and manage all this stuff that means nothing.
Same with CRT. It's the same thing.
It's the same stuff.
It's the same type of bullshit.
It's the same stuff. They're creating, and this goes back to a lot like it's like
bureaucracy.
Create the chaos and then solve the problem. That's what we're talking about. Just a different venue for the same thing.
Well, and you're right. And this is the thing that gets me. Is like, look, there's problems that exist organically, and then there's problems that are created. And things like CSR, things like ESG, things like CRT, even though I brought it up, these are created things. Because, look, I understand that people have differences. I understand that people have problems. You know what's funny is we wouldn't have all these differences and problems if we would stop stoking the fire to them. Like, guys, you know what's hilarious is if you stop throwing trash on the ground, the world becomes cleaner. If you stop looking at someone different than yourself, the world becomes better. It's pretty fucking simple. And when it comes to ESG, there are 17 things that I mentioned that I think we should talk about that seem simple, but if you're astute and observational, you'll understand that the people who make these rules don't actually mean what they say. So the 17 things, they are designed to be a shared blueprint for peace and prosperity for people on the planet, now and into the future. Wow, that sounds so nice. These goals were put into motion officially in 2015 and are intended to be achieved by 2030, called Agenda 2030. Here are the 7 SDGs. Number 1, no poverty. End poverty in all of its forms everywhere. Number 2, zero hunger. End hunger. Achieve food security and improve nutrition and promote sustainable agriculture. Number 3, good health and well-being. Ensure healthy lives and promote well-being for all at all ages. With vegetable oil. Number 4, quality education. Ensure inclusive and equitable quality education and promote lifelong learning opportunities for all, unless you are a specific demographic who wants to get into Yale but can't because you're too good at school. Number 5, gender equality. Achieve gender equality and empower all women and girls. And normally when we talk about equality, we only mention one side of the aisle. Number 6, clean water and sanitation. Ensure availability and sustainable management of water and sanitation for all, unless it involves pouring out waste from Coca-Cola or PepsiCo or some entity that is making billions of dollars a year into a third world country. Number 7, affordable and clean energy. Ensure access to affordable, reliable, and sustainable and modern energy for all, unless, of course, that energy is faulty and doesn't work in winters in Texas specifically. Decent work and economic growth. Promote sustained, inclusive, and sustainable economic growth, full and productive employment, and decent work for all. You'll never be able to move up, and you'll own nothing and be happy. Number 9, industry, innovation, and infrastructure. Build resilient infrastructure, promote inclusive and sustainable industrialization, and foster innovation. Unless, of course, it violates ESG, so then you can't have any innovation because innovation's bad. Number 10, reduced inequality. Reduce inequality within and among countries. Because that's somehow possible. We can somehow reduce inequality between a first world country and a third world country without absolutely destroying the first world country's economy. That's a thing we believe we can do. Number 11, sustainable cities and communities. Make cities and human settlements inclusive, safe, resilient, and sustainable. You'll have so many homeless people around you that will do nothing about that you don't need 4 walls. You can just lie under the bodies of people. Number 12, responsible consumption and production. Ensure sustainable consumption and production patterns, unless, of course, those production patterns lead to innovation, which, of course, we want to stop. Number 13, climate action. Take urgent action to combat climate change and its impacts. An argument that has been around since the early 70s. We will urgently solve a problem that we have decided to change for marketing purposes because it didn't sound right originally, and now it's so broad that it encompasses everything. Did the penguin die because of humans, or did the penguin die because of evolution? We won't answer that for you because we don't believe in evolution. Number 14, life below water. Conserve and sustainably use the oceans, seas, and marine resources for sustainable development. Unless, of course, the sustainable development has been incurred by pollution, which animals might depend upon, and if we change those ecosystems that have been created the last 30 years for those animals will die off anyway. So it's a damned if you do and it's a damned if you don't. Number 15, life on land. Protect, restore, and promote sustainable use of terrestrial ecosystems, sustainably manage forests, combat desert desertification, and halt and reverse land degradation and halt biodiversity loss. Of course, that's if we don't account for the fact that by doing all these things, we are actually killing some animals that have become dependent upon the very pollution that we have created or the climate change that has occurred naturally. Number 16, peace, justice, and strong institutions. Promote peaceful and inclusive societies for sustainable development, provide access to justice for all, and build effective, accountable, and inclusive institutions at all levels. Meaning, if you look like somebody we don't like, you're not going to get opportunities anymore because we don't like you and you look like something that triggers us. And number 17, partnerships for the goals. Strengthen the means of implementation and revitalize the global partnership for sustainable development, which basically means that all the first world countries are going to band together and pretend as if the second and third world countries that want to become first world countries can't, because it violates all the economic and environmental principles that have allowed us to exist, but not them.
I think you should be promoted to the head of the UN.
That is exactly. Well,
you did this perfectly.
He has the qualifications.
I do. Obviously.
I do.
Apparently, according to this, anybody has the qualifications.
Look.
And you know what? That would provide a lot of equality to the UN.
The real problem.
They need someone like you.
The real problem that I have with all this, because all those things sound nice and dandy. Look, actionable goals, because they have listed them out. They have listed out actionable goals for these 17 SDG Sustainable Development Goals. They've listed them out. The UN resolution adopted those goals in 2017. So they have goals. The problem is these goals.
Did you say STDs?
STDs, yeah. The problem is that these goals are impossible. You're going to eliminate poverty. Have you guys not heard of panhandlers? That is an actual occupation that a lot of people choose to have. You see, the problem with poverty, because there's two of them. There's two problems. One, it's people in power base preventing you from moving forward. 100%. Sorry. desk. 100%. There's a problem there. People are moving. They're preventing you. They're putting impediments. Whatever. That exists. Second one is sometimes, and I know people don't like it when they say this, sometimes people are fucking lazy. Sometimes people are dirtbags. Sometimes people are shitheads. Everyone can be included in that. There's a specific book that I've mentioned multiple times. It's called Auschwitz.
I think that's the title.
It's called Auschwitz, and it's called there's Auschwitz, and then there's a not A Few Good Men. It's about the Order Police. I've mentioned it multiple times. Christopher Browning. Here's the thing that I don't think these people understand is I don't think they have the capacity or have thought about the fact that they have potential to be monsters. Look, my immediate family, as both of you know here, is the most important thing to me. And I might have friends and family that are also important to me because I've considered them family by vernacular. But if I had to pick, I have preference. And these people do as well. And that tells me is they don't really care about these things. Because I don't wake up in the morning and think about,
the only time you care about these larger, broader things is when you are okay yourself.
They don't care.
Or when you're not okay yourself. And nothing in between. It's like I said earlier, if you're psychologically damaged with your own life and you need to transfer that aggression, that emotion onto other subjects, you take something on as your goal, as your activist situation. And or if you are set with life and you want to leave a legacy and you want to develop something that's better, then you can go after that knowing your mask is already on.
So here's what I'll say to that. Who do you know, besides me because I'm perfect, doesn't have issues in which they push their ideas and their directions into an area that fulfills some level of idolatry for a particular entity, an activity, or an occupation? Because I don't know a single person. And when you look at Bill Gates and Klaus Schwab, I can guarantee you, even though they might be lizard-human hybrids, they're still humans. And with that being said, all of us have issues. And this type of stuff, whereas it's nice and dandy and it sounds really good on a cereal box and it makes me feel all fuzzy, especially when I play really nice corporate music, it's all nonsense. Because here's the thing. You want to end hunger? You know what's funny? Doesn't America make like food to feed 10 billion people? Isn't there some like metric there?
Hell, America pays farmers not to farm.
Yeah. So here's the thing. You want to solve hunger? We've been able to do that. You know what's funny? Electric cars, they've been around a lot longer than the Tesla. They've been accessible for a lot longer than the Tesla.
Think about how much food we throw away.
80% from high income restaurants, like really wealthy ones.
Especially if you're someone
80%.
Well, especially if you're someone who does like big grocery hauls with organic food and you don't eat it all, you end up throwing away whole
here's the thing.
Vegetables.
Here's the thing. I know that there's some policy in place that allows restaurants to give food, but some city policy doesn't. Mm-hmm. So it's like
they're required to throw it away.
So here's what I say. What I say to all this is, what's the end goal, guys? Because you want look. This is what I think about a lot of these problems. That's what I think. Because if we really wanted to solve cancer, we'd be able to solve it. We would be. The reason we don't solve it is because there's a lot of money in cancer. There's a lot of money in these chronic issues. That is your personal opinion. No. It's a personal opinion, but there's a lot of relevancy to it. Because at the end of the day, every industry is an industry. That includes the medical industry. If we really wanted to solve things, back to our transhumanism argument, we could.
What would we do without pink cleats in October in the NFL? I mean,
I'm not saying, look, I'm not trying to shit on, look, the likelihood that all of us have some level of that is pretty high. So I'm not trying to shit on people for it. But at the same time, it's like, guys, we can travel to the moon, but we can't solve cancer. We can fly thousands, if not hundreds of, tens of thousands of times a day in a metal bird for hours on end and not crash statistically. But we can't solve cancer.
No, we came up with an mRNA.
We can come up with an mRNA vaccine that specifically changes your DNA, but we can't solve cancer? This is where I look at this stuff and I'm like, you guys really don't want to solve these problems.
This is the opposite of planned obsolescence. That's all it is. Mm-hmm. And it's interesting because it's a conundrum for people that really dig into this philosophically, because a capitalistic society, a democratic republic, which we are, it rewards, profit. It rewards individual entrepreneurialism. It rewards these things that also engender a lot of corruption, a lot of graft, a lot of problematic things that don't solve problems intentionally because of those profit, not margins, but profit potentials. So the question is what do we do? A lot of people believe that we go socialist or communist to make this a collective. And I don't agree with that at all. But you look at these things like ESG and you start to wonder, isn't that what's going on?
Yeah.
I mean, we're half socialist already.
Yeah, 100%.
The medical industry in general, the way we supply medicine at a baseline to people in the United States is very Canadian-like now. I'm not here to argue if that's right or wrong. I don't know enough about it to really argue that point other than my gut feeling about it. But standardizing these ESG things, and especially when you go to this scope 3 thing I'm talking about, pushes an agenda on people that can't financially handle that agenda. So it's one thing to have regulations. It's another thing to capture those regulations and have the circular argument between large corporations and regulators that benefits them. It's another thing entirely to then make a part of that equation all the people, because this country is built on the ability for us to pursue happiness, not to be given an equitable version of something, but to pursue it. And if you set up all the rules, whether it's from the corporations or from the government or a combination thereof, to take away the ability not to be on the same playing field, but to even be near the playing field at all, then you've created mega corporations, and they're just going to do nothing but get larger.
It's an unethical legal way of creating monopolies.
Yeah,
is all it is. And look, I understand, bringing up the example I brought up a second ago is a little hyperbolic. With that being said, I bring it up specifically because these arguments that people propose are for things that are much larger than that particular problem. You think we can handle the issues, quote unquote, tied to climate change if we haven't solved that? Really? We can save the world, but we haven't solved that thing. That's what I'm getting at. And here's the thing. I'm not saying that, I'd like to believe there is one, because the reason I say that is because if it didn't exist, just like if, heart disease was somehow solved, the medical industry would not be as large as it is.
Well,
so there's no incentive to solve it.
This goes back to our longevity escape velocity thing from last week.
Well, it goes back to Coach Jordan too.
There's a lot of things that attach to each other, but one of the things that was interesting, I was listening through the LEV stuff, the transhumanism stuff, and there was a comment made by one of us about how we need to sustain ourselves until we get to the point where we can use these technologies to get beyond the one-for-one longevity issue. And I thought, that's an interesting statement. I remember agreeing with it at the time. Then I thought about it later, and I thought, well, hold it. If the idea is that all of us will overcome this ratio that we talked about, 1 year of longer life for every year that you live means you will keep on living, right? Then it shouldn't matter how many potato chips I eat.
No.
Because that's one of the things that will get corrected. It's not like there's some immediate technology that will enable you to live longer. It'll be a consequence of all these things that change our ability to handle the nonsense we do day to day. And each individual will be different, of course. But so continuous improvement, the reason I went off in that direction is because I truly believe in continuous improvement. I think that self-evaluation, company evaluation is an important process in our personal lives, in a company's life. Because if you don't look at the history, especially the recent history of what you're doing as a company, and course correct toward whatever mission statement or goals or whatever you have as a business, then you'll never get there, right? You'll stagnate. So continuous improvement is important. So things like this ESG or CSR stuff, or any of the multitude of things that make our world better, I am not against.
No.
I am against, though, the mandate of them.
Well, let's talk about that.
Because I think our competitive world will manage that process for us if we let it.
Yeah.
And we're not letting it.
Well, and let's talk about that. So ESG specifically, now, according to an article from August of 2022, which I believe, if my notes are correct, it is from Real Clear Markets, August 2022, written by Scott Shepard. He talks about how ESG and the things that are associated with it are no longer holding China accountable. Quote unquote, that story is particularly one of giant investment managers and lenders holding American publicly traded companies to debilitating and stifling politically policy-driven standards that they do not apply to private equity firms or to foreign companies with which these managers and lenders happily deal. By delisting from American exchanges, which China did in August on a small level, but they'll probably continue to do going forward, these corporate arms of the Chinese government and therefore the Chinese Communist Party excuse themselves from having to submit to audits by the Public Company Accounting Oversight Board, PCAOB, a federal statutory oversight outfit. By moving now, the companies are also getting out before the SEC finalizes new disclosure rules that, as proposed, would force companies traded on American exchanges to make highly expensive and speculative carbon emission disclosures, including the emissions created by all of a company's suppliers, as you mentioned earlier. The big index funds get most of their exposure to these companies from securities traded on Chinese, not U.S. exchanges. In the case of PetroChina, for example, American asset managers own about $150 million in depository receipts traded in the U.S., while top institutional holders, including Vanguard, BlackRock, and State Street, own 10 times more in shares, $1.5 billion, traded on the Hong Kong exchange. The major issue with this is that the SEC's carbon emission rules are largely expensive, some say illegal, and seemingly poorly thought out. A good portion of the SEC rules, which require companies to spend vast sums of money to collect and report information about their carbon and other emissions, seem to have little to no impact on the world's climate, something these rules supposedly are directed towards. It's rules for thee and not for me.
Yeah, and this is an in-between business. It's a middleman. It's a created. There was a perceived need for something, a regulation of some kind, an entire industry being created around that perceived need, with underpinning assumptions that are incorrect.
Yeah,
that's what this is.
Well,
and you mentioned BlackRock, and the Larry Fink, the CEO of BlackRock, is he's the largest asset manager that is. BlackRock is. And he basically said, his quote was, behaviors are going to have to change. You have to force behaviors. And at BlackRock, we are forcing behaviors. Forcing behaviors.
Interesting.
He said the quiet part out loud. That's what he did. And again, these are entities that have the deepest pockets you could possibly imagine. Mm-hmm. So putting additional regulations, additional burdens on them, if it costs them 10% more as a company, they can do a couple of different things. Obviously, inflation will show you this, is that they can push those price increases to the consumers of whatever it is they're creating. And in the secondary aspect of it is that they can continue to, broaden the scope of these regulations anytime they want, because other people can't handle that financially at all.
Yeah. It's a really disturbing way of hiding monopolization is what it is. Because a lot of this, and look, I think there's partisanship on both ends. I think Democrats and Republicans both say ridiculous things. I think they both have partisanship. They both have bias. With that being said, ESG specifically, many of these ideas come from partisan entities, such as the Task Force on Climate-Related Financial Disclosure, which is run by Mike Bloomberg. Either way, it seems as if ESG, much like CSR, is a guise for political and social elite to hide their partisan agenda behind. It's a measure of control which, like all policy, will eventually make its way down to those who can't afford luxury homes, as you say, and can't afford expensive cars, and can't afford private jets, or $100,000 educations.
So let me ask you something, both of you, because these things are driven usually in two directions at the same time. It's kind of, Sun Tzu's kind of philosophy. Tactically in war, you attack on a couple of different fronts because you strategically have an advantage if you do things like that. And one front, of course, is all this regulation, government oversight, all the different things we've just been talking about. The other is financial. And what I mean by that is because there are institutions out there. Standard & Poor's just talked about, they made an announcement that ESGs are going to be, there for states soon. Because Standard & Poor's is the largest credit association in the world. And they determine the credit for countries, whether the country has viable credit standards. And they're going to push that same standard down to states as well. And ESGs are going to be part of that. That they announced it. And people like FICO said they will probably include evaluations of property energy rating data for mortgage valuations in the near future. Now, this is, in my opinion, should be our next podcast. How this ESG stuff conflates with, the individual push for social scores. Because in essence, you're starting with a corporation and it's pushing down to the scope 3, which is the indirect source, right? And I've talked about that in other podcasts, indirect source rule in the transportation industry. But one of those indirect sources is us as individuals and how we're affected by that. And social credit scores. And I don't want to get into that today. That's
we'll do it for our next episode.
Yeah. But when FICO starts talking about that, when the financial industries talk about that, what you realize is there's another player in the game. And that player is institutionalized individuals that get involved with these companies at a high level that have been educated over our terrible education system for the last 30 plus 40, 50 years, that are now in places and positions of power that have integrated belief systems that you can't wash out of them. They're in positions of decision making, and their decisions are basing themselves around these ESG kind of parameters. So a financial institution says to big corporation A, unless you hit a score of 87 on the ESG score rating, or what if you have a wear point in California for the indirect source rule for carbon emissions of X, unless you meet those, we either won't give you a loan or your loan will be 4% higher than the other guy. Mm-hmm. What are you going to do as a corporation?
You're screwed.
You're going to do exactly what the fuck they say.
Or you don't start.
One or the other.
I mean, this is, you said you had a question for both of us? An associated with that?
Did I just...
Yeah, you said let me have a question for both of us, yeah.
So I'm talking about the educational side of this. Mm-hmm. See, because I think that's the component that a lot of people are ignoring. Mm-hmm. There's all this pressure and power and economics and things like that, but there's also an aspect of this. Because they say that one of the reasons ESG is being pushed so hard is that the millennials and Generation Z, whatever that there's going to be trillions and trillions of dollars in investment into companies, and that those generations want so much this social consciousness to be integrated into these companies' way of life that's why they're pushing it. I think that's false.
It's bullshit.
I think that people have been educated over the course of the last 50 years in such a way to put these things at a higher priority than other things. Well, because to your point earlier, sorry to do this, but to your point earlier, these first world, second world countries, if you really want them to be successful economically,
let them be.
Let them frickin' be.
Yeah.
All they have to do is use our example from the last 100 years, and they will catch up to us in no time.
And here's the thing, because there's still another question there, but I think the question is what we believe in that area. Look, I got a public school education, and I don't believe these things. When it comes to Beowulf mentioning that people are off base when predicting things, she mentioned it very slyly earlier. That's true. Most people think that there's 25% of billionaires or people who are millionaires in the country or something ridiculous like that.
Yeah, I can't remember. It was, I think, from CNBC, but it was like
something ridiculous.
Crazy.
Yeah. So there's an overestimation, which means that my opinion of this is that those people that come from those very special schools that have those very expensive degrees that are ultimately useless because they were lied to, and then they believe the lie, because that's what it comes down to. We all collectively lied to each other. I'll have it on the table. Everyone lied to each other, and then everyone continued to lie to each other because they believed a lie that wasn't true in the first place, that you have to get a degree to be successful. And people say, well, we never said that. Well, you implied it. Just like, people didn't really say that, you're not a citizen if you don't agree with the medical advisements of the president, but they kind of made it seem like you weren't one. So you don't have to say the loud shit out loud for it to be true. So when it comes to that type of stuff, I don't think that a lot of people believe it. But I think the problem is a lot of people don't want to say anything. That's what I think. I think a lot of people don't want to say anything for fear of repercussion.
I
don't think it's true.
I think all you have to do is look at ideologies in other countries, their viewpoint of someone like the United States.
I don't think it's true.
There are a lot of people in countries like Iran that think very highly of Western civilization because there's an inherent internal sense of freedom about looking even at the nonsense that occurs in the United States. The freedom to speak, the freedom to do, right? But the people that are in power in those other places, what they do to make sure the next generation believes them, at least for the most part, there's always, people that don't, but they indoctrinate the next generation. Mm-hmm. And you do that through what? Education.
Yeah, but there's a myriad of people that go through that education that turn out to not believe those very things.
In our country specifically, because there's other
across
choices.
The seas. So, I've had conversations with people in Ireland that know more about our country than I know. And I'm a citizen here. So what does that say about Americans? It says a few things, that their education is not as effective as it should be, which tells me the indoctrination is not as effective as it should be. Well, you can look at the CCP. You know why they haven't invaded Taiwan yet, in my opinion? Is because the people that they have educated and brought lots of money to, one, don't have kids to replace the people who would inevitably die in war, and two, don't want to go to war because it disrupts their daily life. And the same thing occurs, in my opinion, when it comes to people who, to your point, think that they believe all these things. I think people only believe those things just to get along, to go along.
Let me give you one more example, though, because we're all familiar with TikTok.
Sure.
We all know where it comes from. And if you study what they actually do, mm-hmm. if you saw TikTok in China, you wouldn't know it's TikTok.
Yeah, it's different. Yeah.
It is totally about educating young and supporting the narrative that their country wants them to support.
Yes.
And what do they feed the United States?
Something entirely different. The question I have in retort to you is how many people are active users on TikTok in the United States?
I don't know.
It's not as much
my
as you
generation,
think. It's not as much as you think.
What is
it's not my generation either.
Well, I'm just saying.
See, the reality.
My point is that it's an indoctrination effort.
Sure, and that exists
through mediums of communication. Uh-huh. We talk about that all the time. We talk about that all the time with the bias in the media, mm-hmm. legacy media or non-legacy media. We talk about all that stuff all the time.
But again, this goes back to what we've talked about in relation to that. We got to end soon. We're going on a long one. This is 2 hours. With that being, like, Beowulf's over there, like, yeah, this fucking conversation.
He's like, I'm hungry.
Yeah, I'm tired of this. With that being said, we've talked about that. The media's influence, as much as people say that it's really, really large, their viewership is at an all-time low. It has been high.
Media is how you get your information.
I understand.
I don't care how it is.
But here's the thing. People in my demographic and the demographic after us are less likely to believe things face value than they are of demographics before them. That statistically is true.
Okay, if you're less likely to believe things that are face value, what do you believe? Nothing?
Maybe.
Okay.
Or maybe something that's not, or
right?
maybe something that the narrative hasn't been said. Maybe something else. And I'm not to suggest, I think you're probably correct. It's probably apathy. But apathy, if pushed in a direction that's somewhat constructive, can go back to healthy skepticism. Happens all the time. People become absolutely terrible. They hate the life that they're in. They become apathetic with life. And then they realize, wait a second, something happened to me and I like life again. Happens all the time. I don't think things are monolith of, I really don't think that. And I think when it comes to this, ESG, it's going to come to pass. It will. It'll come to pass.
It already is.
And same, 100%. And same with socialism. America will become a socialist country. I will tell you that right now. We'll become a socialist country. You know what's funny? Britain did that in the 1800s. Yeah. And it absolutely destroyed their economy. And you know what they did? They changed. And the same will happen here.
Well, you know because what they just instituted, though? Great Britain?
Sure, they might have instituted something different.
A health social score.
Maybe.
Which is 7 years after the CCP did it.
But here's the thing, Bull, to your point. These things, just like with things in the past about lauding founding fathers and all that jazz, they're not end-all be-all. They might be there for, hell, they might be there for our lifetime. But the difference between America, as everyone knows, and the rest of the world is there's a lot of guns here. And if things don't work, America is likely to throw that shit in a bay and then burn down the city. So I have a observation. My speculation is this will come to fruition, and then things will get so absolutely bad that people will riot because they did it 2 years ago and they'll do it again. That's my speculation. And on that note, I think it's good to wrap up because we are exactly at 2 hours and 33 seconds without the intro. This is me looking at the Roadcaster. Any more things to say about this depressing topic that is also fascinating at the same time?
I've got a lot more to say, but I'm going to save it for next time.
Next episode.
The downstream effect of ESG.
Oh, it's going to be significant.
It affects all of us as individuals.
100%. You're correct. Yeah. Okay, well, on that note, that wraps up the episode. Please don't end it all. Life is still good. Things will still get better. Things will be better. We'll probably only be paying 15%.
On a message of hope.
Yeah, we'll still be probably only paying 15% interest on our stuff next year. But we hope that this episode has given you some insight into ESG and CSR. We probably have displayed our bias here, but I don't care. These are my beliefs. This is my opinion. That's what the show is about. And obviously Beowulf and Bull have their opinions as well. But yeah, hopefully you guys got some insight in this, and hopefully you will return next week when we talk about, what were we going to talk about?
Social credit score.
Social credit score. Yeah. Hopefully we talk about that next week. We should talk about that next week.
Happy Thanksgiving, everybody.
Happy Thanksgiving. And thanks again to the Wolf and Bull family for tuning in. We will see you next week.